Hello and hi, dear friends. Friends of Gartenschlau.com, Bernd here, and today I want to talk about the topic of planting. You see here the three varieties that I introduced to you early in the spring and which were provided by Sperli, and this is what today's topic will be about. What do I have to take care of? First, here is the dahlia, out blue bayou. Then the dahlia, Nagano. And the dahlia, Lady Darlene. In this video, I will also focus on the dahlia Lady Darlene. Limit myself. For the planting, however, I will use the other dahlias to explain a few things to you. The Lady Darlene is a beautiful orange with red. Petal edges and tips. I find it a very beautiful, interesting variety. It is considered to have giant blooms, which is something particularly good about dahlias, and the bloom diameter is larger, 20 cm. So that's already a good thing. If you see now, this is a 26 cm pot, which means the bloom would just fit into this pot. When cultivating dahlias in arts containers, cultivated, then a 7.5 liter pot, I would say, is the minimum. 7. Better are 10 or even 15 liter containers, planting containers, tubs, depending on what you have or when. And you can also clearly see that there are already shoots here. They are still a bit red now, which is generally fine, because the plant also has a relatively high red content in its foliage. And that is typical. If we compare this now with the Nagano dahlia, it has a very green shoot. They were also recently still in the bags. That was intentional, but I will get to that in a moment. And you can already see in which direction the roots originally grew and where the shoot practically emerges. That is to be planted upwards, theoretically. Or what does theoretically mean? Practically, you have to plant them like this. Here is also a small, let's say, broken piece of the rhizome. A new dahlia, can certainly emerge from this, and always plant it in such a way that the shoot can come out at the top and the root was at the bottom. That means it all goes into one pot, just one dahlia. Now, I would like to show you something else with the dahlia Nagano, depending on how the packaging was stored and how long it was stored. You can already see that the rhizomes have become a bit shriveled. This is not really that dramatic in itself. You can see that the sprout is still nice and green, and new shoots are also emerging here. There are now two possibilities for planting. Either you decide to plant the whole thing slightly horizontally, as this gives the shoot an easier chance to grow upwards. Another option is to say, okay, I'll plant it like this, and either this shoot then grows downwards and then upwards again, which it is currently doing, or I remove this shoot. If you remove this shoot, it wouldn't be that dramatic or bad for the plant, because if it bends down here and grows up again, it's not necessarily beneficial. I will remove it now. And you see, it's not too big. The wound isn't. It also has the advantage that it's similar to when you remove the shoot from a plant, then the other dormant buds have the chance to sprout. And you can see there are two shoots here. That means ideally not necessarily horizontal. If you have no other option, then plant horizontally, especially if you see or don't see where the roots were located. But ideally, if the shoot points upwards, that's always better. And the root, of course, downwards. And you see, I already have a ball here. This means, especially with such rhizomes that are already suffering a bit from dehydration, you can certainly let them swell a bit in water so that you can plant them better afterwards. When you look at such a package, it's always very helpful to see the planting depth, 20 cm. Well, with a pot like this, which is about 20 cm high itself, it's a bit tricky. That means you should plant it roughly halfway up if not even a bit lower. And then, if necessary, if the plant becomes too large, replant it again. Or if it's an early culture in spring, keep the plant in the house or in the conservatory at a bright location. Until you can then plant them out, you can plant it. In fact, the recommendation from the manufacturer is April, and then there is more information, such as the planting distance and so on. The flowering period now is from July to October. That means we have to wait until the plant is large enough and starts to bloom. Of course, it can potentially start blooming earlier, but it doesn't have to. Usually, right? I would say the first blooms are always like this, and what is specified is the main flowering period. If a bloom appears earlier, it's not really a big deal. And now we see this is approximately how deep the hole is. Let's compare it. Yes, the rhizome is planted at about 2/3 of the pot's height. As mentioned, where the shoot is facing upwards in this case, it bends a little downwards, but that's not really a big deal. You could also plant it slightly at an angle so that the shoot has an easier time. Since the whole thing is relatively, well, I would say round in this case, it's not so bad. And this small piece of rhizome, you shouldn't forget that either. Then you simply tap the whole thing down. And then practically fill the rest with soil. With such a pot, when you plant the whole thing, it's always good to have a watering edge. At the moment, it's not really necessary yet, because I would say if you pour water in now, I still have a watering can here. So if we pour it in symbolically here, then everything is in the middle anyway. Planting time, as I said, in April. But of course, you can also do it in mid-May or until the end of May, depending on the situation. You can now tend to find clearance items or garden center clearance posts, especially for dahlias, in the tree corners. It's starting to slow down now. The time, and then it's high time if you've bought them to plant them by the end of May. Then the plants will still do quite well. Now the whole thing has started, and you can also place the pot outside. In principle, you can choose a semi-shaded 2. Sunny. Location for the dahlia. You can place the pot outside as it is, but it shouldn't necessarily be fully exposed to the rain. It can be a bit sheltered from the rain as long as the plant hasn't emerged yet. Because the wetter and more saturated the substrate is, while the rhizome is still, let's say, a pure rhizome with little sprout. The higher the risk that the whole thing can rot, and then you have nothing left of the plant. Don't forget, if you are peeling the varieties, then you are well prepared and also know what's going on with the pot once the plant is nice and big. It can also be placed in the rain. Caution. Snails love von dahlias. This means you need to pay a little attention to that. I had the experience, at least with the location I am currently using. It can be very snail heavy, and from year to year it can really be extreme. If you have further questions about the cultivation and care of dahlias, feel free to write them in the comments. I will gladly answer them for you. Otherwise, give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye.